Tuesday.
Good evening. Welcome to the Monomoy Regional School Committee meeting for Thursday, December 14th. We are calling the meeting to order at 6:40. We're a little delayed. I apologize. We had a technical difficulty with our live stream. So everything should be good now. And our first order of business is approval of our November 9th minutes.
I move to approve the minutes from our meeting with the...
Nope. Just our regular minutes.
Just our regular minutes?
Yes.
I move that we approve the meeting minutes from November 30th.
Second.
Oh, wait.
Yeah, thank you, Steve.
November.
You know what? We might have to hold off on those November 30th since it says November 9th. So while I appreciate your motion, would you care to maybe, because it says November 9th on our agenda.
Oh.
Okay.
So we'll have to hold off on those. Would you like to withdraw your motion?
I so withdraw my motion.
Thank you.
I'll go home.
No, don't go home yet. All right, so then we will move on to public comment. Anybody here for public comment? Seeing none, we move on to our student representatives report. Miss Boyle's not here. She makes our night. So we'll hold off on her, and she's going to have an extra large report for in January. Mr. Carpenter, do we have any recognitions?
Just some quick ones. I'd like to thank the Art of Charity for 3 different donations for the school. First, $500 to purchase board game simulations for David Alexander's classroom here at the high school. $560 for 2 brick pie units and additional Lego components for drawing for Mr. Oldak's class, which is looking to bridge the current robotics platform to a broader system capable of drawing any image that students can create using the Python programming language. And then also $1,200 to help close the gap for the Global Studies trip to the Dominican Republic.
Excellent. Thank you for all those donations. Anybody else have any other recognitions? Seeing none, we will move into reports and discussions, and we have Ms. Kane to discuss a Monomoy Regional Middle School trip to Washington, D.C. for the spring of 2018. Hello. It seems so far away, but it's really not. Go ahead and do it.
Cool.
It's all good.
Hi all, thank you for having
Hi.
me tonight. I come to report on last year's trip to Washington that you had blessed us on and we had a blast on, and give you some updates for the potential plans for 2018. Here we are, the planning team, a mix of 7th grade teachers and special UA teachers who know the 7th grade for at least a year when we go, maybe up to 3 years, at the National Zoo, playing with the pandas. We worked all year last year and now this year with World Strides, the company that Rachel had used when she was at Chatham Middle, and they had exceeded expectations on all legs of the trip. Planning, bus drivers who knew everything and knew everything about traffic, people at the hotel to help us, to watch us at night, to tell us where the pool was even when there wasn't one, the tour guides who knew everything that Mr. Wilson could quiz them on off of his iPhone. It was unbelievable. They were great. It would take us on the itinerary that they had planned, and also little stops that they just happened to notice were free along the way. Here we are rubbing Albert Einstein's nose for a little extra IQ on our way back to the May testing season. The numbers have changed a little bit from last year. Last year we had one in May, which turned out to be in conflict for some families with college graduations and parties and things like that. So we pushed it back to April, just before vacation. So the 5th through the 8th would be 2 weeks before April vacation, come back, have a full week of school, and then have a week to recover if we need it. We upped the cap. Last year we took just under 60 students. We upped it to 90, and we have since had 70 seats filled. We still have a 1-to-10 student chaperone to student ratio, and we have added an extra night, which accounts for the extra $127 for this year. We've also added an extra stop at Mount Vernon, and that's what we'll do with that extra time. We're excited to see George Washington's Manor and just talk about slavery in our country. Here they are at the Air Force Memorial last year, looking at some of the virtues of our country. Very cool to see them there. Some of our favorites from last year, they loved the morning at the Arlington National Cemetery. We had students with family members whose grave sites we could find. The morning at the zoo was perfect for middle school. Each chaperone took students to a different Smithsonian museum, and they got to go to their specific interests. That was really fun last year. The food was above expectations for a middle school trip, but even the adults were happy. We loved our Cape Cod bus travel company and our knowledgeable, thoughtful, courteous drivers. Great relationships. We hope to have them again this year. Our hotel accommodations were perfect. Everyone had their own space. Everyone was respectful. Our night guards reported to me every morning at breakfast what had not happened in the night. That was really lovely. That was good to wake up to every morning. And again, just to recap World Strides, we've checked out a few companies in our tiny world language department at the middle school, and World Strides has seemed to come on top each time. They had a liaison at the hotel, and I said, I didn't know this, but it's someone on our trip's birthday today. And she said, I'll be right back. And she came back with cupcakes for everyone, and we sang and had a party. That's just not what you expect from a run-of-the-mill travel company. It was lovely. Perfect execution from someone who thinks about nothing but details. So we hope that you appreciate the update on the trip and will bless us on another excursion in 2018.
Any questions for Ms. Kane? Ms. Stout?
I just have a statement, and that is that I'm so excited about this. My granddaughter's going, and just the things that you shared were, any mother that's a warrior, not that my daughter is, but I think this is fabulous for the kids to go.
Thank you.
And I'm glad that, that you've got such a good crew going with them. Thank you.
Mr. Duvall?
It's nice that you're getting in and out before school vacation week, because
Yes.
it's an absolute zoo.
Yes.
No pun. Anybody else? Mr. Russell?
It's a terrific trip.
Thank you.
Like Sharon, I have a grandson going, so I'd ask you to just alert the night guards.
Here's his picture.
This is what he looks like. Keep an eye. Would anybody care to make a Mr. Duvall?
I move that we approve the spring of 2018 trip to Washington DC.
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That is unanimous. Very
Thank
good.
you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the report and the plans.
Yes.
All right, next up on our agenda is Mrs. Barnes and the Monomoy Regional High School trip to Iceland in 2019, which is even further away than spring of 2018.
Yes, yes, it is. I'm already going somewhere with students that you've given me the blessing to take them to London in 2018. We're looking forward to it. We're about 4 months out from that trip. We have, just as an update, we have 29 people attending that trip for London. We have 25 students and 4 chaperones from our high school teachers here. We're really looking forward to that. And I hope you will give us some consideration for this. I don't actually have a visual for you because I've never been to Iceland. So I'm just going to share with you kind of how I came to this place. So for those of you who haven't met me, thank you so much for having me here. I'm Rachel Barnes. I'm actually an English teacher at the Monomoy Regional High School. And as Sarah had mentioned before, I was in charge of that rodeo to Washington, D.C. Since 1997. And in fact, when my first year here was the last year I did that trip to Washington, D.C. I didn't have any foot in the door at the middle school any longer, but I had a child who was not going to get to go if I didn't do it. And instead of being a horrible mother, I said, I'll do one more. So that brings me here. So I've had extensive experience traveling with kids and making connections between the curriculum and what's going on the trips. But what I'm presenting to you now actually doesn't have any connection to any of the curriculum I teach. So why Iceland? And it started with a phone call from EF who said, I see you're not traveling in 2019. Why aren't you taking kids in 2019? And I said, well, I want to do London as an every other year trip because I think it's important for kids to have something to build to and work towards for 8th and 9th grade. And I said, we'll give you $200 off if you go somewhere for all the kids. And I thought, oh, now I've got kids who could get something. And if I don't do something, they don't get it. So I thought about it, and I was thinking about other things that I'm very passionate about. And I've done a lot with conservation efforts on Cape Cod, and I really do have a passion for the environment. And in looking at other things that they offer, Iceland really stood out as an opportunity for our kids not to necessarily connect to my curriculum, but to connect to something that I have a deep passion for that I think is important, looking at development of things. I also, it doesn't hurt that I went to this wonderful book conference on things that are recent and of interest to kids, and this beautiful book came out this year on what it's like to do geologic exploration in Iceland, and I put it on the shelves in my classroom, and kids keep kind of picking it up, and it wanders, and sometimes I have to track it down and bring it back, but kids are definitely interested in finding out more about it. So why now? Because they gave me an offer I couldn't refuse. And why Iceland? Because I see it as an opportunity for our kids to really go and experience a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see, how volcanoes change our world, how, that whole geologic study, I think, is important. So it's a benefit for students academically because we touch on this, but to get the roll up the sleeves, walking on a glacier, seeing a volcano up close, all of those kinds of things is not something we can do here on Cape Cod. We see the effects of that, but we don't see, the creation of that. Just one more thing. If anybody's not familiar with Surtsey, Surtsey was an island that is the newest place on the earth. It was built by a volcano in the 1960s. It's off the coast of Iceland, and once a year scientists are going out there. Tourists are not allowed to go, but they're bringing back all the evidence to explain how life develops and at what speed it can develop. So new plants arrive every year, new bird life arrives every year, and what they're learning from it is how our society develops and grows, and it's extraordinary. So if you haven't found out anything about Surtsey, I encourage you to. And our kids will get that opportunity if we can go. Another thing beyond the academic benefits and that exploration is it really hits all of the core values that our school holds important. The development of critical thinking. Why do things develop this way? What do they look like? If you see it like this, what does it mean when we go back home for our environment? Perseverance, challenge leading to growth, communication and collaboration, and most importantly, passion for learning. I think that all of those are here. The company EF, who is offering the trip, is really one of the most renowned companies, most trusted companies in travel business for overseas travel. We looked at World Strides, and I love their name, but they're really good at domestic travel. If I had to travel within the United States, I would go right back to World Strides. If I had to travel in the world, I wouldn't go with anybody but EF. I think they look out for kids on trips. They're very careful to make sure that everybody is accommodated appropriately. I even spoke to them about how handicapped accessible this was. They got a hold of their guides in Iceland, and with the exception of one glacier walk, everything is handicapped access. So any student is welcome to join us on this trip in grades 8 through 12. We'll be looking primarily at the Reykjavik area and the Hifjolsfjörður area of Iceland, so it'll be 3 days in each. So it would be a total of 6 days, and we're hoping to go over April vacation. And if that doesn't convince you that kids are going because they love that exploration of science to go to Iceland at the end of their winter, I don't know what else I could do to convince you when they could certainly go to the tropics or somewhere else that was much warmer. Are there questions I can answer for you at this time? Yes.
Ms. Richardson.
It may say here, but I don't see it. What out of the dates? I know it's 2019, but when?
Oh, it will be April of, well, we can't book the tickets. We won't have the specific dates, but we're looking for April of 2019. So I'm trying to time it around the school vacation break so that they'll have minimal time out of classroom. I know that students need to be in class in seats in order to learn, and that their credits are, their high school credits are important. So we're going to try to minimize that by keeping it as close to the break as we can get it.
Ms. Stout.
Do you have an idea of what it would cost for kids to go?
Yes, the cost is actually included in the packets that you received, and if you take a look on, I think it's the second to last page, the total cost for students for this trip is $3,370. We do have about a year and 3 months to start fundraising and planning for that. So I'm hopeful that that will be something we can accomplish.
Any other questions? Mr. Duvall?
I didn't see any menu options from Iceland.
Well, that's because we're not going to feed them. I understand there's a lot of it. Interestingly enough, it's funny because people have asked me, well, why would the cost be so high? You see these $99 rates to get to Iceland. And part of it is because a lot of things are shipped in.
Yeah.
So they don't have a lot besides fish for what's available that's native. So yes, the sample menus for Europe do not include Iceland. I have not yet asked what we might be eating. I'm not entirely sure. I want to know, but I'm sure kids will know, and they'll find out before we go.
Mr. Russell?
Rachel, clearly a well-traveled, it's a general question that kind of puzzles me when we approve all these trips, and we really have given the kids here in this school a great opportunity to go to several areas of the world during school, might be school vacation. The question is this: over the years, how have the non-traveling staff colleagues, AP all the way down, managed to handle kids who go for 4, 5, or 6 missed days and still aren't coming back in a deep academic hole because they missed stuff?
That's an excellent question. I have
Thank
to say,
you.
when we did the Washington trip, we never took kids out of class. So I wouldn't be able to answer that question. The London trip that we did last year, students missed the Friday of school. And they were made aware that they needed to get all materials completed and turned in for the singular day that they missed. It's part of the reason I've told EF that we travel over the vacation or as close as we can get to it. I'm aware that there's sometimes issues in the country where there's only certain things available on certain dates. And that's part of the reason I picked this one. Was it's a 6-day one, so it's unlikely to affect them for more than 2 academic days.
Ms. Stout?
It might be on here, but I don't see it. What would be the minimum or the maximum number of kids you'd take?
I'll take as many as would like to go.
Okay, but to have it happen then?
To have it happen, I think there just needs to be 2 or 3 signed up. I know that when Rose took the students to Cuba, she had 3 students signed up, and one of them actually fell ill and was not able to attend the trip and was sent back. Again, EF handled that situation beautifully. What could have been a nightmare for them, they had people in place to get her on the next, turned her around Miami and sent her straight back to make sure that she was cared for. So that was, absolutely gives me trust in this company that they're not going to put kids at risk. But only 2 students went on that trip, and they had a wonderful experience.
Ms. Long?
It sounds very exciting. We were talking about the total for the students was around $3,300, but you also mentioned fundraising. Do you have any idea what you anticipate typically for fundraising and how much is contributed to each individual student?
Well, I do not. For the most part, we've had parent volunteers who have handled most fundraising efforts, largely because I like to plan the trip, and
Yep.
people who are attending the trip, it's probably better if somebody else focuses on that. And I'm terrible with money. I'll be direct. But one of the things that we've noticed is that, through grant money and things, we've also been able to defray costs in the past as well. Our first trip to London, Art of Charity paid for our transfer bus to and from the airport, which was a nice way for parents to save a little money and get all the kids to the airport on time. Okay. So we do what we can, and what I've found has worked for people who have done fundraising in the past is that the families who participate and contribute sort of split the proceeds from that, and that goes directly towards their trips.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, I'm always one to, any excuse to get the kids off of our little island is a good idea, in my opinion, because if they can, they need to explore and see other parts of the world. So, would anybody care to make a motion for this trip? Mr. Duvall?
I move that we approve the Monomoy Regional High School trip to Iceland in the spring of 2019.
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? And that is unanimous as well.
Thank you.
Plan away, Mrs. Barnes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, next up on our agenda is Ms. Isernio with her preliminary, with capital G draft, if I know what you're going to say, FY19 budget.
Good evening, everybody. Katie Isernio, Business Manager. So FY19, we're up to our elbows in FY19. I keep saying, now what year is this? Is it 17? Is it 18? Is it 19? Just to recap some of the activities that have taken place thus far, we've had meetings with all of the principals, administrators, finance committees from the two, finance teams, the two town accountants and town managers, and we have the whole, discussion surrounding the needs that some of the schools have, some of the wants, and we have it all together, and our next step, of course, is to get together, you'll see the last slide, the finance subcommittee of the school committee to talk through this. We presented this information to the MREA, the Monomoy Regional Education Association team, when we were meeting in negotiations, just to kind of give them an idea of where we were and what what we've been hearing from the town of Harwich in terms of a budget message going forward. So this is real big picture conversation that will lead to a lot of smaller conversations about the detail behind FY19. The Harwich Selectmen's ask in their annual, Scott, please jump in whenever you desire.
I'm ready anytime you want.
Okay. Every year, the two towns send out information about where they'd like to see the budgets coming in, and we had an ask from the town of Harwich to, look towards a 2% increase in the FY18 budget, which would represent from over our did I say 18, FY19 budget? Over our FY18 budget, that would be just over $762,000.
And just for clarity, when the selectmen tell town departments, stay within 2%, there's sometimes a disconnect between how the selectmen and the finance committee look at our budget compared to when you have that 2% message, because DPW for fire and police and having a 2% increase is on sort of salary and sort of supplies, but the town carries health insurance over here, so the health insurance is separate from that. So, so when we, then the next slide that Katie's going to share is if you sort of look at what that increase might look like if you're actually doing an all-in cost, which is what we have to present a budget to the town, where it includes the salaries, includes the cost of running the district, but it also has the all-in cost of health insurance that's in our budget number that so at times you're looking at the 2% message, but health is over here. It's not an all-in. And I think last year there was a little bit of a disconnect because there was a sort of a budget message that people were seeing, and then they were seeing the school district percentage increase and saying, oh, well, that's so much higher than what some of the town departments were. But I thought the town manager did a nice job of coming in and explaining to folks, no, if you look in at all-in costs, we were dead on where police and fire were last year. So, so this is sort of looking at the message to departments and what it would be. And the next slide looks at maybe more of an all-in.
Which one?
Yep.
This one? When we looked at historically and in some conversations, looking at if the district was able to present a 3.25% increase in the 19 budget over 18, that would represent an increase of $1.2 million over FY18. However, and I'd like to just say as well, both of these towns really support education so well, but this is the reality of kind of the cost of doing business, for lack of a better word. When you look at what we know coming forward, we've been advised to budget a 15% increase in our health insurance costs for FY19. The rates will be set at the end of January into February. So as we go through the process, we'll know these numbers. But that's where we are faced right now. So that 15% increase represents $733,000 in our, over the costs of health insurance and dental in FY18. These are known. Our custodian contract, we've already negotiated our steps going forward with our Unit A, which are teachers, and Unit B, which are our administrative assistants and our instructional assistants. The Barnstable County assessment, that number, actually we have the solid number now. I originally had that at 73,000, so we know that the increase in our Barnstable County, that's the retirement for non-mass teacher retirement employees, is going to increase 48,000. A bus contract potentially up 145, and some other contractual obligations of $11,000. So that represents $1.2 million in what are known fixed costs. The health, as I said, the health and dental, that one we will lock in on a firmer number at the end of January into February. And also the bus contract, we see how that comes in. Does anyone have any questions at this point? Okay.
So Katie, how about if you flip back one slide for a second?
Well, I think it might be this one here.
No.
Okay.
That. So you know, when we're looking at this slide, that $1.2 million budget increase, that would be a level staffed budget increase, and at the moment, that number is not carrying a COLA, and we're in the process of going through contract negotiations with the MREA. So, so contract negotiations would take whatever would appear on the next slide and add to it. So we're looking at $1,238,000, and if we flip back to that, the other direction, there we go. Versus $1,244,000. So it's so we already know that we have fixed costs that are going to take us right up to that budget maxima that we're sort of anticipating before we even get to acknowledge what contract negotiations might provide when it comes to COLA as we go through the negotiations and get through them.
So this is the impact of just isolating out a 2% increase, which we alluded to, and then with the cost of the projected 15%, we would have $29,000 available. And this is also if there was a 3.25%, and how much, it's just really to demonstrate how much of that is eaten up by that one line item in the budget.
Ms. Richardson?
I just need clarification. Sure. On the increase of 1.23874 million, why is that figure different from that one, 1.244?
So this,
not 0.44, but
this
1,000,000.
$1,244,735. That represents the costs that when we're looking at the FY18 budget and then moving that budget forward to 19, these are the costs that we know without even doing anything are going to increase. Again, we could have health insurance come in at 13%, and so, but we've been advised through the Cape Cod Municipal Health Group to, at this point, project a 15%. The other number, the other 1.2 represents what an increase of 3.25% would represent in dollars.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I guess, the punchline here is, that realistic maxima increase is almost identical to what we know the fixed costs are. That's before COLA, and then the next slide that we'll get to, it's also before the list of things that the principals have been telling us they'd like to see and that the school committee has said that they'd like to see. So you'll see in the next slide, there'll be, costs for strategic planning. So those are additions beyond what is currently in this year's budget. So you'd have that plus COLA on top of what the maximum is.
So this slide, but this is not an exhaustive list. It might be an exhausting list. But, so what we do is we, through all the budget discussions, talk about, how we would like to see things, programs implemented, changes, et cetera. And then some of the realities. We have vans and we have vehicles in the district that are getting quite old, and it's getting to the point, just like at home, it's like, do you buy that new tire, or is it time to say it's time to get a new vehicle, when you've exhausted everything else? So these are just some of the areas that, in conversation with the principals and with Director of Curriculum, Director of Student Services, athletics, et cetera, technology, what we, what potentially could be added that's not included in any of the budget numbers that we've been kicking around. So I think that that's part of the conversation that we will have to have in our discussion and scheduling a finance subcommittee with the school committee to talk about how we want to frame the FY19 budget.
I'll go back. Just leave that one up there. So, so these are things, so, right now, we have as a placeholder, 45,000 for a strategic planning consultant, and then, to any other thing that might be involved with it. So, so again, placeholders, it could be less. There's, the social emotional learning curriculum that we've talked about having. The middle school has a need for, for a reading teacher, so there's the middle school we've also talked about being, needing more clinical support, so there's an adjustment counselor there, need to go and have a team chair to go help the special education IEP process that's happening, particularly at the middle school. There's a need for an additional special ed teacher at the high school. We had a presentation on the sort of great tech ed that's happening at the middle school. We've hired 2 new tech ed teachers at the high school that really want to bring robotics to the high school, but there are material costs there that are going to be about $20,000 for robotics to kind of come here to the high school. We've talked about the want to look in the strategic plan at the ELA curriculum for the elementary school, so that words their way. We've talked about this concept of a VIPS coordinator, and on our end we've thought about sort of rethinking that to be someone who would look more broadly at community engagement. So we're thinking that $20,000, which is a lot less than the $60,000 that I was had in other presentations, might be able to go and accomplish that. And then we also know that our AD stretched really thin trying to be the AD at both the middle school and high school, and could use some part-time clerical support. So you have all these different wants that are all outside of what the current budget is. Plus there's a want that we know that our staff will have for for a COLA as we go through the contract negotiations, and all of that then is above and beyond what what we see out there as the wherewithal that towns are saying we can do, and what we know our fixed costs are just going into next year. So so we have at the moment a finance subcommittee meeting scheduled for Tuesday, 5 p.m. And we'll have to roll up our sleeves and do some value engineering, I think we call it.
And I think it's important, we mentioned Howard, and of course it's Howard and Chatham, but as we know, the assessment is rounding up, 75% is assessed to the town of Howard, so the impact is significant. So I don't want to not forget about Chatham as well.
Any questions regarding the FY19 budget? Fantastic news.
Jazzy.
All right. Thank you. All right, then we will move on to the CVEC discussion, which we brought up at our last meeting, and we had a question on the actual per kilowatt hour cost. And Mr. Carpenter?
The answer on it was there, I think on the grid, there are some entities that are listed as having a .005 cents per kilowatt hour. Those are individuals that produce the power and that we are considered by CVEC to be off-takers. We purchase the power, so ours is the .0025. So Mr. Duvall, I believe, has the amended motion.
Mr. Duvall?
I move that Monomoy Regional School District continue the adder paid to CVEC for management of round one projects will continue to be .0025 per kilowatt hour of production for off-takers. The extension of the memorandum of agreement with round one optional administrator adder of .0025 is to be for 1 year, with the duration extending from July 1, 2018 through June 30th, 2019.
Anybody care to second that?
I would second it.
Thank you. Any further discussion on that? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That is unanimous. Thank you, Mr. Duvall. And that moves us to our reports and discussion on the regional agreement. I had hoped to have a update, was trying to have a conversation with Mr. Metters and Mr., I can't say his last name.
Dykens?
McCaskill.
Ms. Caskell, thank you. I was gonna say, pronounce it poorly. To just kind of get an idea as to where they would like to see the school committee move in terms of the regional agreement. And that did not happen this week. So hopefully, prior to our next meeting in January, we can have a sit down with them just to kind of get their feelings on the matter. And I think also, since we have had some time, well, about 2 weeks, to ponder what we had a discussion about at our workshop, I was wondering if anybody had any additional thoughts as to where we'd like to lean the regional agreement conversation to move it when we, again, we have to present it to the Board of Selectmen as to what we would like to see as a committee and to adopt a change in the agreement. Ms. Stout?
I would like to see us put in our budget $70,000, and if it's not able to be in there, have the selectmen add that to whatever they're giving us. So we could try having a bus go to, from Harwich to bring kids to Chatham, if they'd like to go, because that would be the least disruptive thing.
So let's back up a little bit and make it a little bit more vague in the sense of how would you, where would we change the regional agreement? Or do we leave the regional agreement as is in that section? So
You wouldn't
it's-
have to change anything to do that,
So,
because it would be by choice, and so it wouldn't be against anything in the regional agreement.
okay, so what I'm trying to do is direct the discussion to be focused around what we're talking about, which is the regional agreement. So you're saying that in the regional agreement, the section on elementary schools, you'd like to try to leave it as is for now?
For now, because I do not personally feel like the towns who took 50 or 60 years to do the regional agreement are ready, I know, for people in the schools, for the kids in the schools, many of the parents. But I think that we'd get too much backlash from the communities of not understanding all this. So I think one step at a time, since we can take this up every year.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Russell?
I would somewhat disagree with Sharon, as I did 2 weeks ago. I think the committee, the school committee, has the authority to identify issues that may impact the school system at large. Once the school committee does that, I think they have the authority to come up with what would be reasonable options. Whether or not this issue of smaller numbers in Chatham and larger numbers in Howard never occurs. In fact, you're far better off, I believe, acting on a recommendation 2 years in advance. In the meantime, you educate the parents in a variety of different ways, just like start time. Otherwise, page 3 of our regional agreement causes, as I said 2 weeks ago, that at least a third, if not almost a half of the student body, namely the Howard youngsters and the Chatham Elementary youngsters, are subject to a voluntary, invitational sort of way to solve a problem that needs more than that. So I think, now whether or not that requires us to take a vote, I would have to go back in my memory as to what recommended simple statement that would say the school committee, the region committee, in conjunction with the superintendent, has the authority, et cetera, et cetera. And then that could be passed on to both select boards for a vote. Otherwise, the demographics from year to year, I really feel that and in conclusion, I wouldn't want to have to respond to a person who elected or threw a vote my way to solve a major issue as it confronts us in a year from now or 2 years from now. So I think it's very reasonable that this school committee that's been duly elected would make a decision to correct what we feel is an appropriate correction, independent of the confusion it may cause in the minds of people who don't attend every evening, and it's our task to make certain they finally reach an understanding, maybe not an agreement, but an understanding that this board has the right to make that decision. So that would be my thought. If we need to go and come up with the one word or a sentence to clarify that, we could easily do that.
Ms. Long?
I would agree with Mr. Russell with the caveat of the amount of time that we have spent, which is good, on this particular page in the regional agreement. I think that it would be beneficial at this point, seeing how long we've been discussing this, that we take this opportunity to make a change to the regional agreement, which allows us the flexibility for whomever decides, the selectmen or the school committee, whenever that's determined, to have that in the regional agreement as we're editing it now, so that we are not stuck in the daunting process a year from now when we do decide we want to do something, to then have to revisit the regional agreement and make that change in order to move forward with whatever change it is we decide to do, which is inevitable. We're going to have to do something, whether it's busing or redistricting or whatever is decided. I just feel like we should take the opportunity to make some type of a modification in the regional agreement now so that we're not bogged down with it later. And then it can sit for another year or 2 years while we educate the public and try to get a better handle on what it is we think is the best decision for the schools, for the elementary schools.
Anybody? Mr. Duvall, I was just trying to let everybody speak.
The message I got from the selectmen was that they wanted protection for the families. But I think the protection for the families needs to come in the form of us getting buy-in by both boards of selectmen, not trying to reinvent the wheel every time we want to do something, having to change and have support for a new regional agreement by both town meetings. So I agree that I think we need to have something in this agreement, this go-round, that sets it that we go back, if we have to do something with the elementary schools, we go back and get buy-in from both boards of selectmen. Not necessarily that we have to go to town meeting for it, but that we go through the educational process, which is something that we've become very adept at.
Mr. Russell?
I don't have that polling that our superintendent created about a month ago, but and I could be wrong on the stats, but of the three options, which is way down the road, we wouldn't even, I think there was about 70% of those who responded, and there were a couple hundred, thought some change was probably appropriate. They disagreed on one or two or three, but 70% of those who forwarded back to the superintendent the choices, 70% of them said that probably would be in need of some change, and the impression was either option 2 or 3 or some other future option. So I think step one, as far as raising the knowledge base of the mums and dads and the community, has taken place, and it may take another year to continue that information sharing, so that someone says, in other words, the regional agreement, the way it states, doesn't allow any committee to do that. So that's my final thought.
Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts? All right, so where I'm kind of stuck is the fact that we need to have some sort of final decision as to what we would like to present. I think that, I'd have to look at my goals sheet to see when the actual dates were, but I'm pretty sure that we need to, in January, have a final version of the regional agreement that we want to present as a committee to the selectmen. Does that seem doable to be able to have a vote from the committee as to what changes we would like to present as the agreement to selectmen? Do we feel like we could do that at our first meeting in January, or do you think, which would be January 11th? Or do you think we should wait until the second meeting? I kind of would lean towards the first meeting in January, if I could get like a general consensus head nods, or we could vote on that in January as to what our changes would be. And I guess the way that I would look at it is, do we have a general consensus to say that a draft that we would present would have a change in the elementary school configuration, that page 4, section 5, part C? Not necessarily what was presented at the workshop at our last meeting, something along that lines, that has some sort of change to it that doesn't just state, if you live in Chatham, you'll go to Chatham Elementary, if you live in Harwich, you'll go to Harwich Elementary. Do we have a general consensus that we'll have some change to that?
Yes.
Ms. Richardson, Ms. Sheehan?
Well,
Feel free to,
the statement I'm reading here
Yes.
on page, well, on the copy I have, page 4, C, it said there'll be no less than one elementary school in each member town.
and then it goes on from there as well,
Yeah,
yeah,
but-
okay.
Can you not go on from there?
I think we could. I would have to say we'd check with our attorneys to see what would be most appropriate. Is that what you were gonna say, Mr. Russell?
Yes, I would suggest our chair and our superintendent contact our newly assigned school attorney and allow him to enter in with you folks some wordsmithery that would capture in a simple way what we're all here kind of saying, and then bring it back to us.
Mr. Carpenter?
I just think, you know, at least what I was hearing from the select boards is that there's a want to make sure that there's a, whatever that wording is, that there's a process in place that, you know, that has, you know, just, I think there's a want to make sure that there's thought that goes behind whatever change might need to happen in the future. And I don't know yet, you know, if there will need to be change. You know, I mean, you know, we know that the writing's on the wall, that Chatham Elementary will continue to shrink to 2 sections. And that may be just fine, although, you know, I can speak for myself as a parent. I'd be concerned with 2 sections, whether or not there's a large enough peer group for my own kids, but that's from my own experience living in Chatham and having kids in Chatham public schools, you know, or the Chatham school system in my first year here with Monomoy, that it was a small peer group that my son and daughter had that first year, and I'm so, you know, but we all approach issues from our own vantage point. I do think where it starts to get a little more urgent is, and I think, Terry's kind of alluded to this, we don't know if, if Harwich continues to see some growth in its student numbers, and Harwich Elementary School starts to get a little more densely populated and has class sizes that start to get appreciably different than Chatham Elementary's, and that's when I kind of worry about the fairness of the experiences that are happening in one elementary school versus the other, and that's where I think it's important that we have some ability to go balance it. But again, I think what I heard from the selectmen is there's a want to make sure that there's a process, and I think we need to make sure that that process is included in the wording.
Ms. Richardson?
I was going to say, so how do we get in the wording to go back to what Terry was saying, to have the school committee make those choices? Or,
The last version that we worked off of when we had the workshop, it does say the regional district school committee, as it determines to be in the best interest, may assign students to elementary schools based on factors, da-da-da-da-da. So that would be the school committee making those decisions. Go ahead.
my thought, though, when the selectmen were here, is they wanted to go to town meeting.
I think that,
Some did.
so I think some did. I think that it's a very different position for them to see, especially the members that were a part of selectmen when the towns were individual schools. I mean, when the schools were for the individual towns. So when Chatham Public Schools was Chatham Public Schools, the selectmen had a lot more authority, I guess would be the way to say it, over the school district than they do now. I mean, in essence, we bring the budget to them, and then we have the conversations as to what we're going to do with the budget before we present it back to them again. Whereas when the towns, and I'm only familiar with it, and I'm looking to Mr. Duvall because you were a part of it, then I'm only familiar with it from outside looking in. But when Chatham Public Schools, when you went to the selectmen more or less directed the committee as to, this is what we need you to do with your budget. Whereas now it's more, can you do this? And we come back as a committee and we say, this is what we'd like to do, can you give your thumbs up approval to it? And so I think there's a loss of their control over what the district does. And so I think that it makes them a lot more comfortable to know that it's not just the 8 of us making that decision, even though we know we would do the right thing, and we would have public forums, and we would have all this education. I think there's a little uncertainty to have that conversation. So I think, respecting what they're saying, I could see it being a 3-way vote, having the 2 boards of selectmen and having our committee to say that we're gonna have these forums, and we're gonna have these conversations, we're gonna have a vote with the school committee and the boards of selectmen from each town to decide what we're gonna do with the elementary schools. I mean, there was many of the selectmen that suggested that as well, in addition to a couple others that were concerned about wanting it on the town meeting floor decided. Mr. Russell?
Madam Chair, I think you hit the nail on the head, and I think, at least at first blush, as far as the draft, passing it in a month or so, to have us include that with our attorney ruling, it's some sort of a 3/5 vote on both boards of selectmen approving a recommendation from the school committee on this topic here. I think that would be, for the short and long term, a very reasonable way to bring in the selectmen on board here, as opposed to 2 town meetings with 200 to 300 people in an auditorium for the evening deciding an issue that it's fairly complex. Not that I think that the public with many evening meetings could also be brought up to some level of speed about, we understand, we get what you're talking about. So I would agree with that
So
may.
kind of what I'm brainstorming in my head is that for our next meeting, so I think that this is pretty much the only controversial piece of the regional agreement to say, I mean, I think all of the other changes are more or less, just clarifications and fairly basic changes. So I think this is the only one that we're still having a little issue that we're wrestling with. So what if before our next meeting, hopefully before even the holidays, that we come up with 2 or 3 different versions of this section to decide upon as a committee that we would want to put forward? Is that sound?
Prior to the January 11th meeting?
So, yeah, so we come up with it beforehand so that you'll have time to kind of process it and ask questions about it, so that I'm just thinking, because I know that, like I said before, you snap your fingers, it's gonna be January 1st, and then it's gonna come right after that is our next meeting. And I also hope to have a sit-down just with the 2 chairs of the selectmen to just kind of get their feelings as well, and just bounce ideas off of them. Ms. Long?
I think that sounds great to have a couple versions before January 11th to go over and have presented so that we could hopefully vote on them. The only thing I was just looking at, and I don't know if this is a question for the lawyers as well, is I'm thinking about changing section or editing page 4, section 5, part C, and I'm thinking about what we would write in there and how it's going to impact the rest of the regional agreement. And I just was having to look at transportation, which was page 5, section 6, and then it led me to section 9, and there were things, towns' foundation enrollments and the effect on transportation, and if in fact the enrollment number is going to change, if you're changing the grade population in each town, or is it just based on district, so we don't have to worry about, I like how you're going, no, Jackie.
Foundation enrollment is it's the number of children that live in the community.
That live
get
next, so it doesn't matter.
Get educated in public schools, so it doesn't matter.
So it's not gonna matter for either town, they're not gonna be paying more, that number's not gonna change if, like, more Harwich kids, if they're pre-K and grade 2 go to Chatham and your 3 and 4 go to, or however, if possibly could. And that's also something we can revisit in the agreement if we had to someday, if we made a change.
I think
Hypothetically.
One thing, right, so I think one thing that people who, the 3 people that might actually be watching this out there on video should understand is that financially, no matter what happens in terms of elementary reconfiguration, it doesn't impact the towns financially at all. And I worry, as the superintendent, and I worry for us as a school committee body, having gone to town meetings in our 2 communities over the last several years, I worry that our parents oftentimes are underrepresented at the town meetings, and I think Terry's right. Both the Chatham parents that responded to the survey and the Harwich parents, there's the majority of parents in both communities have indicated that some sort of change is likely needed. They disagree completely on what the change might be, but they both understand that there might be something better that could support the education of the kids, and I worry that voice is going to get lost in all of this, and that there's going to be this misconception that, this is going to cost the communities more money. It's not a financial thing. It's us trying to come up with what's educationally best for kids, and I want to make sure that those parents' voices are represented. And I was a little concerned that that there's a lot of people that I think are weighing in out there that don't have a horse necessarily in the race and are worried, it's going to cost us. It costs money. At the end of the day, it's the foundation, the foundation enrollment that all this is based on. That's just how many kids are in Harwich that go to public schools and how many kids in Chatham that go to public schools. It doesn't matter what town they're going in. It's going to cost the towns the same.
Ms. Stout?
point of clarification and then a comment, or question. The, for the survey, it was teachers and parents that were asked to complete it, is that correct?
Yeah,
And it was just elementary school, teachers and parents?
no, all teachers, we broke out staff separately from parents.
Okay. So the high school staff got to say what should happen at the elementary school?
Yeah, and,
Oh, okay, I
and
didn't know
we,
that.
and we separated, so you can go dig down and see,
Well, it was a public survey, so
Yeah.
anybody could have
yeah, and
clicked
we,
on the link to,
in the,
Oh.
in the graphs that we presented last week, we had the, here's how the staff responded. At the bottom of it, I said, here's how Harwich Elementary staff responded and Chatham Elementary staff.
But of the parents, we only had a portion of the parents, so just to be precise, that we don't know how the majority of the parents feel because we just had a representative group. It's likely that that might be the case,
Yeah.
but,
I think that we have a pretty good feel for how the parents have responded. So it wasn't every parent, but I think one of the interesting aspects of the survey is after about 150 parents responded, the percentages didn't change appreciably. So so by the time I took it here to the first time, there were about 250 parents that had responded, and the percentages really hadn't changed since 150 parents. And then by the time we presented the next time, there were about 400 some odd folks that had responded, and there was a percentage point here or there, but at the end of the day, the punchline was, I think there's more parents than not that see value in some sort of change, and the two sets of parents from Chatham and Harwich have were sort of skewed differently as to what the best
Right.
option might be.
right. Chatham didn't want to have to do anything different, but they don't mind if the kids come from Harwich. But, so on a different subject, when I first heard about the capital expenses, each town taking care of their own building, it made sense to me. But if we did something like the upper and lower school, it might not make sense because then you'd have a lot of more adapting of the elementary school in Harwich, and maybe, I don't know if that capital, would that be a capital expense and go to Harwich then?
I think that came up in the meeting with the selectmen, and
Okay.
we had said that, if there was a scenario where all the children were going, that you had an upper and lower, that you would treat those capital costs the same way that you treat the high school and middle school costs, where they're shared by the towns based on the foundation enrollment, not based on the town. But we had suggested that it might make more sense that if Harwich is a Harwich building, and that's where children from Harwich are going, and Chatham is the Chatham building, and that's where children from Chatham are going, that it might make more sense to have Chatham responsible for Chatham Elementary School
Right.
under those cases,
Right.
and Harwich Elementary School.
Right, right. Okay, I just wasn't clear about all that. Thank you.
all right, so at our next meeting, we'll look to have couple of versions of looking to vote on as what our recommendation will be to the selectmen. Does that sound good? Okay, thank you. And then we move on to our strategic plan update. At our last meeting, we formed a ad hoc subcommittee to hopefully have a meeting and make a decision about. Update on that, Mr. Carpenter?
We have not met yet, but we pinky swear that Sharon, Steve, and I will get together before our January 11th meeting.
Okay, so we'll have an update there as well. Wait. And Ms. Sheehan too?
Oh,
You on the ad hoc subcommittee as well?
I'm saving her.
You were he was saving you from that.
Saving.
All right, so we will then have an update on that at our next meeting, and hopefully a recommendation to what you guys would suggest that we do for our next strategic plan. Subcommittee reports, seeing none. Superintendent's report, seeing a brief one.
Hey,
Mr.
real quick,
Carpenter.
a ray of sunshine out there.
Really?
So, I would like to thank Fontaine Brothers for stepping up and helping resolve our HVAC challenge. So, my understanding is that
That's more than a
they
ray of
will-
sunshine.
They will make sure that at no further cost to the district, that the sensors get put in the appropriate place, and hopefully we can close out this project so you never have to hear a building
Wow.
project update again.
We should have put that at the beginning of our meeting.
Yes.
Next time, we're gonna move that update up. That's excellent
Yeah,
news.
so that's good news.
Very good news. Thank you for all your hard work on that, because that has been a
Yes.
thorn in your side.
For years.
Yes. Well, what are we, year 3? Do you have anything else to update us on?
I think we could,
You can update more if you need.
we're good.
Okay. So we have therefore reached the end of our agenda, except for adjournment.
So move.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. We're not going to discuss. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That is unanimous, and we are adjourned at 7:46 PM. Thank you very much.